The elbow that shook the NBA. 3 seconds. That's all it took for Victor Wembanyama to go from the future face of the NBA to the center of the biggest playoff controversy in basketball. One moment, the San Antonio Spurs looked unstoppable. The next, their entire championship run was hanging by a thread, because deep inside a roaring Target Center crowd in Minneapolis, with millions watching around the world, Victor Wembanyama completely lost control, and the NBA may be preparing to make him pay for it. The second the elbow connected with Naz Reid's face, the arena exploded. Timberwolves fans jumped out of their seats screaming. Minnesota players instantly pointed toward the replay screen. Spurs players froze in shock. Even the announcer suddenly stopped mid-sentence as chaos swallowed the building. Then the cameras found Wembanyama. And what made the moment even crazier was the look on his face. He didn't look angry. He didn't look violent. He looked stunned, almost like he already knew this single moment could change everything. Sunday night was supposed to be another legendary chapter in Wembanyama's rise to superstardom. The Spurs entered Game 4 with a 2-1 lead over Minnesota after Victor delivered one of the greatest playoff performances ever seen from a 22-year-old. Analysts were already calling him unstoppable. Fans were comparing him to Kareem, Hakeem, even Prime Shaq. But playoff basketball changes fast, especially when emotions boil over. Midway through the second quarter, Wembanyama fought for a rebound in heavy traffic. Bodies crashed into him from every direction. Jaden McDaniels grabbed his arm. Naz Reid crowded his space. The Timberwolves had been attacking him physically all series long, pushing him, bumping him, trying to drag him out of rhythm. And then Victor snapped. His right elbow flew backward and smashed directly into Reid's chin. The whistle came immediately, but the real tension didn't start until the referees walked toward the replay monitor. That's when the atmosphere inside the arena completely changed. The boos got louder. Fans started chanting, "Kick him out! Kick him out!" The giant screen replayed the elbow again and again while Wembanyama stood near half court staring at the officials in disbelief. Every Spurs player looked nervous, every Timberwolves fan smelled blood, and suddenly the entire game no longer felt like basketball. It felt like a breaking point. Then came the announcement. Flagrant foul penalty 2. Automatic ejection. The crowd erupted like Minnesota had just won the series. Meanwhile, Victor Wembanyama slowly walked toward the locker room after the earliest playoff ejection by an NBA All-Star in nearly 30 years. And according to people close to the situation, the Spurs organization immediately realized something terrifying. The elbow itself might not even be the biggest disaster, because now the NBA league office has a decision to make. Suspend Victor Wembanyama for Game 5 vase. And the entire series could flip upside down overnight. Before we continue, comment below and tell me where you're watching from tonight, and if you think the NBA should suspend Wembanyama, press 1 right now. If you think the ejection was already enough punishment, press 2. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story is about to get even crazier. The blueprint to break Wembanyama. By the time Victor Wembanyama threw that elbow in Game 4, the Timberwolves had already accomplished exactly what they wanted. Not on the scoreboard, inside his head. Because this series was never just about stopping Wembanyama from scoring, Minnesota was trying to break him mentally. And little by little, it was working. From the opening tip of Game 1, the Timberwolves treated Wembanyama less like a basketball player and more like a once-in-a-generation threat that needed to be physically worn down before he could destroy them. Every possession became a war. Every rebound turned into a wrestling match. Every drive into the paint felt like entering traffic at full speed. They pushed him, grabbed him, leaned on him, hit him before the ball even arrived. And most importantly, they never stopped. That was the blueprint. Because the NBA had already learned something terrifying about Victor Wembanyama during the regular season. If you let him play freely in space, the game becomes unfair. His length destroys passing lanes. His timing erases shots at the rim. His shooting stretches defenses beyond reason. And once he gets comfortable, he doesn't just dominate games, he humiliates teams. Minnesota understood that better than anyone. So instead of trying to outplay him skill for skill, they attacked his patience. They attacked his emotions. They attacked his body. Naz Reid battled him on every rebound like his life depended on it. Jaden McDaniels constantly crowded his dribble space with aggressive hands. Julius Randle slammed shoulders into his chest every chance he got. Even when the whistle stayed silent, the message stayed loud. You will not be comfortable in this series. And slowly, frustration started building inside the young superstar. At first, Wembanyama handled it like a veteran. He kept blocking shots, kept scoring, kept smiling through the contact. In Game 1 alone, he shattered playoff records with 12 blocks, sending Timberwolves players crashing to the floor, possession after possession. But despite one of the greatest defensive playoff performances ever seen, The Spurs still lost. That changed everything because Minnesota realized something critical that night. Wembanyama could dominate individually and still be dragged into ugly basketball, exactly the kind of basketball the Timberwolves wanted. By Game 3, the physicality reached another level entirely. Every catch turned into a collision. Every post touch came with extra contact. The Timberwolves were no longer simply defending him, they were exhausting him. And the dangerous part? It was starting to show. For the first time all postseason, cameras began catching visible frustration from Wembanyama. Complaints toward officials became more frequent. His reactions after missed calls got sharper, his body language changed. The calm superstar image started cracking under playoff pressure. But inside Minnesota's locker room, that was viewed as progress. Because once frustration enters the mind of a young superstar, mistakes usually follow. Then came Game 4, the moment the Timberwolves had been trying to create all series long. One rebound, one emotional reaction, one split second where frustration finally exploded into violence. And suddenly the most unstoppable young player in basketball wasn't controlling the series anymore. The series was controlling him, the season that made him untouchable. What made Victor Wembanyama's playoff meltdown so shocking was simple. Before the elbow, he wasn't just another NBA star. He looked like the future of the entire league. After the medical scare that cut short his previous season, many people wondered if his body could survive the physical punishment of the NBA. But Wembanyama returned stronger, sharper, and more dominant than ever. Night after night, he made basketball look unfair. He blocked shots that no other player could reach. He hit threes like a guard. He controlled the paint like a veteran center, and when teams tried to double him, he simply saw over the defense and punished them another way. By mid-season, opponents no longer looked like they had a real answer. Then came the awards. Defensive Player of the Year, unanimous. Youngest ever. Suddenly, Wembanyama wasn't being discussed as potential anymore. He was being discussed with history. David Robinson, Hakeem Olajuwon, Michael Jordan, Tim Duncan. The names around him were no longer projections. They were comparisons based on what he was already doing. And the Spurs changed with him. San Antonio went from rebuilding to terrifying. The losing years disappeared. The confidence came back. Young players grew faster beside him. The franchise that once felt stuck suddenly looked alive again. With Wembanyama leading the way, the Spurs won 62 games, claimed the number 2 seed, and entered the playoffs as a real championship threat. That is why the moment in Minnesota hit so hard. Because this wasn't a role player losing control. This was the face of San Antonio's future. The player the Spurs had waited years to build around. The player the NBA was preparing to market as its next global superstar. And in one heated playoff moment, all of that greatness suddenly became surrounded by one dangerous question. Was Victor Wembanyama ready for everything that comes with being hunted? When greatness became a target, the deeper the Spurs moved into the playoffs, the clearer the truth became. Victor Wembanyama wasn't just dominating games anymore. He was scaring people. Every series started looking the same. Opponents entered with confidence, energy, and aggressive game plans. Then Wembanyama would completely change the geometry of the court within minutes. Drives disappeared, passing lanes closed. Open shots suddenly felt impossible. Players started hesitating around the rim the moment they saw his shadow rotate across the paint. And once fear enters a playoff series, everything changes. Against Portland in the first round, Wembanyama announced himself immediately. In his playoff debut, he exploded for 35 points while shooting like a guard and protecting the rim like a veteran defensive monster. The Spurs won comfortably, but the real story was the reaction around the league. People weren't just impressed, they were alarmed because this didn't look normal for a two-year-old player. It looked historic. Then came Game 1 against Minnesota, and somehow Wembanyama became even more terrifying. 12 blocks, 12, a playoff record. Every Timberwolves possession near the basket started turning into chaos. Layups vanished. Floaters got erased. Even experienced veterans looked nervous, challenging him inside. At one point, Minnesota players were visibly changing shots before even leaving the ground. But despite all of that dominance, the Spurs still lost. That single loss changed the tone of the entire series because Minnesota discovered something important. They might not be able to stop Wembanyama individually, but they could drag the series into pure physical warfare, and that became the strategy. Game after game, the Timberwolves stopped trying to outplay him skill for skill. Instead, they focused on exhausting him. Constant contact, hard screens, bodies crashing into him after rebounds, arms grabbing him in the post, defenders crowding his landing space. Everything became physical. Everything became personal. But Wembanyama kept answering. In Game 3, he delivered one of the greatest playoff performances ever seen from a player his age. 39 points, 15 rebounds, and 5 blocks. The numbers placed him beside legends like Shaquille O'Neal, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Hakeem Olajuwon. For a moment, it felt like the Timberwolves were running out of answers completely. The Spurs took a 2-1 lead. Minnesota looked desperate. And desperation in playoff basketball usually creates dangerous situations, because by that point, this was no longer just about winning games. The Timberwolves were trying to survive Wembanyama, and survival can make teams do extreme things. Every shove became harder. Every rebound became more violent. Every possession carried frustration, tension, and emotion building beneath the surface. Then came Game 4. The pressure, the hostile crowd, the non-stop physicality. And finally, the breaking point. The moment everything changed, the moment itself lasted maybe 2 seconds. But for the Spurs, it may end up defining their entire season. Midway through the second quarter of Game 4, the atmosphere inside Target Center already felt hostile. Minnesota fans were screaming after every possession. The Timberwolves were playing with desperation. Bodies were flying everywhere. And Victor Wembanyama looked more frustrated than he had all postseason. You could see it building. Every missed whistle irritated him more. Every collision added another layer of tension. Every possession became heavier. Then it happened. Wembanyama grabbed a contested rebound surrounded by defenders. Jaden McDaniels immediately wrapped onto his arm while Naz Reid crowded into his body from the other side. For a split second, Victor tried to pivot through traffic and protect the ball, and then his elbow flew backward, directly into Reed's face. The sound alone changed the arena. The whistle exploded instantly. Players stopped moving. Fans jumped out of their seats, pointing toward the court. Minnesota players demanded a review before the referees had even reached the scorer's table. Meanwhile, Wembanyama stood frozen near the baseline, trying to process what had just happened. At first, it looked like a hard playoff foul. Then the replay appeared on the giant screen. Everything changed. The crowd started roaring louder with every replay angle. ESPN cameras zoomed directly onto Wembanyama's face, while the officials studied the footage frame by frame. The Timberwolves bench was already celebrating near half court. Spurs players looked nervous. Nobody inside the building needed an explanation anymore. They knew what was coming, and somehow the silence around Wembanyama felt louder than the crowd itself. Because for the first time in his young career, he looked completely overwhelmed by the moment. Then referee Zach Zarba made the announcement, flagrant foul penalty 2. Automatic ejection. The building erupted instantly. Fans screamed. Minnesota players pumped their fists. And Victor Wembanyama slowly turned toward the locker room after the first ejection of his NBA career. But the strangest part came next. According to people near the Spurs bench, Wembanyama actually looked confused when the officials explained the decision. At one point, he reportedly asked teammates what the ruling even meant. That reaction stunned people watching around the league, because it reminded everybody of something easy to forget. He's still only 22 years old. 1 minute earlier, he was the unstoppable centerpiece of a championship contender. Now he was walking through a storm of boos, while social media exploded with accusations, debates, and non-stop replay clips spreading across the internet within seconds. And without Wembanyama protecting the paint, everything changed immediately. Anthony Edwards attacked relentlessly. Minnesota's offense opened up. The Timberwolves suddenly looked alive again. Meanwhile, the Spurs looked shaken. Not just because they lost their best player, but because deep down, everybody understood the same terrifying possibility. Victor Wembanyama might not be done paying for this moment yet, because now the NBA league office was officially involved. And that's when the real fear started inside San Antonio. The NBA Civil War. The second Victor Wembanyama was ejected, the basketball world split into two sides. And overnight, the NBA turned into a battlefield. Sports shows exploded Monday morning. Every network led with the same replay. Analysts argued over it for hours. Former players flooded television panels. Social media turned toxic almost instantly. And everywhere you looked, the same question kept appearing over and over again. Was Wembanyama dirty? Or was he finally pushed too far? Some people defended him immediately. They pointed to the non-stop physical punishment he had absorbed throughout the series. Clip after clip started circulating online, showing defenders grabbing his arms, shoving his body, and hitting him across multiple games. Fans called it targeting. They argued the Timberwolves had spent the entire series trying to provoke him emotionally. According to that side of the debate, the elbow wasn't planned aggression. It was accumulated frustration finally exploding. But the other side didn't care about contact. They cared about the replay. And the replay looked brutal. Slow motion angles showed Wembanyama's elbow smashing directly into Naz Reid's face while millions watched around the world. Critics immediately accused him of losing emotional control at the worst possible moment. Some analysts even questioned whether the pressure of being called the future of the NBA was starting to become too much for him mentally. Suddenly, One of basketball's most admired young superstars became the center of nonstop controversy. Even former NBA players couldn't agree. Some veterans said playoff basketball has always been physical and emotional. Others argued that superstars must remain disciplined no matter how frustrated they become. The debates got louder with every hour, and while the media war exploded publicly, inside San Antonio, anxiety was growing privately. Because none of the arguments on television actually mattered. Only one opinion mattered now. The league office, the NBA officially began reviewing the incident for possible supplemental punishment that instantly changed the mood around the entire series. What started as one ugly playoff moment suddenly became a potential turning point for the Western Conference playoffs themselves. If the league suspended Wembanyama for Game 5, the entire balance of power could shift overnight. Minnesota knew it, the Spurs knew it, and the Timberwolves smelled opportunity. Meanwhile, clips of Anthony Edwards celebrating after the ejection spread everywhere online. Wolves fans believed momentum had completely flipped after looking overwhelmed for parts of the series. Minnesota suddenly had life again. And perhaps most dangerous of all, the Spurs suddenly looked vulnerable, not physically, emotionally. Because for the first time all season, people weren't talking about Wembanyama's greatness. They were talking about his composure, his maturity, his ability to handle playoff pressure. And in the NBA, perception changes fast. One night you're the future of basketball. The next morning, people are debating whether you're ready for it at all. The pressure of being the next face of the NBA. People love talking about Victor Wembanyama like he's some kind of basketball experiment. 7'4", impossible wingspan, alien talent, future legend. But moments like Game 4 remind everybody of something important. He's still human, and the pressure surrounding him right now is almost impossible to fully understand unless you're living inside it every single day. Because from the moment Wembanyama entered the NBA, expectations stopped being realistic. Nobody asked whether he could become great. People immediately started asking whether he could become one of the greatest players ever. That's a completely different level of pressure. Every game became national television. Every quote became a headline. Every bad performance became breaking news. And every dominant night only made the expectations even heavier. The NBA didn't just see Wembanyama as another superstar. They saw him as the future of the league itself. That kind of attention changes everything. It changes how opponents treat you. It changes how referees judge you. It changes how fans react to you. And most dangerously, it changes how you react to yourself. Because once the world starts expecting greatness every night, frustration becomes harder to control. One missed call feels personal. One turnover feels magnified. Every physical hit feels intentional, and during the playoffs, all of those emotions multiply under pressure, especially for someone as young as Wembanyama. At 22 years old, he's carrying an entire franchise on his shoulders. The Spurs rebuilt their future around him. Fans believe championships are coming because of him. Analysts compare him to legends before he's even reached his prime. That sounds exciting from the outside, but inside, the pressure can become suffocating. And Minnesota understood that perfectly. The Timberwolves weren't only attacking Wembanyama physically anymore, they were attacking the emotional burden he carries every single night. Every shove tested his patience. Every hard foul challenged his composure. Every collision forced him deeper into frustration. Eventually, something cracked. And honestly, maybe that was inevitable. Because NBA history is filled with legendary players who reached a breaking point before learning how to fully control the chaos around them. Michael Jordan had it. Kobe Bryant had it. Shaquille O'Neal had it. Even Tim Duncan battled frustration during brutal playoff wars. The difference is that most young superstars break privately. Wembanyama broke in front of the entire world. Now the question becomes much bigger than one playoff foul. Can Victor Wembanyama emotionally survive being the next face of basketball? Because talent has never been the concern. The real challenge is handling the pressure that comes with becoming larger than the sport itself. And after Game 4, that pressure has never felt heavier. The decision that could change everything by Monday morning, the entire NBA was waiting for one thing. The league's decision. Inside San Antonio, tension took over everything. Coaches tried preparing for Game 5, but everybody understood the truth. None of it mattered until the NBA announced whether Victor Wembanyama would be suspended. And the silence from the league office only made things worse, because history offered no clear answer. Some fans believed the ejection was enough punishment. Others demanded a suspension immediately. Analysts spent all day comparing Wembanyama's elbow to past playoff incidents involving players like J.R. Smith and Hassan Whiteside. The debates exploded everywhere. Was it frustration or was it reckless? Meanwhile, the Timberwolves quietly gained confidence, because even without an official suspension yet, momentum had already shifted emotionally. Just days earlier, the Spurs looked completely in control behind their young superstar. Now uncertainty surrounded the entire series. Would Wembanyama stay composed if he returned? Would referees watch him differently now? Would Minnesota become even more physical knowing frustration was affecting him mentally? Those questions suddenly became impossible to ignore. And while television debates kept growing louder, social media turned the controversy into a full-blown war. Slow-motion clips of the elbows spread everywhere online, while fans argued nonstop over whether Wembanyama had been pushed too far. But inside the Spurs organization, one fear mattered more than all the noise: the psychological impact. Because playoff basketball runs on confidence and emotion, and suddenly the player carrying San Antonio's future looks shaken for the first time all season. Meanwhile, Anthony Edwards and the Timberwolves looked energized by the chaos. The crowd sensed weakness. Minnesota sensed opportunity. And now the NBA had to decide whether Victor Wembanyama's punishment was already over or just beginning. One moment can change a career. The terrifying reality for the Spurs was no longer just about losing one playoff game. It was about what this moment could become. Because in the NBA, reputations change fast. One night can completely rewrite how the world sees a superstar. Only days earlier, Victor Wembanyama looked untouchable. Analysts were discussing championships, MVPs, and dynasties. The Spurs looked like the next great Western Conference powerhouse. Every conversation around Wembanyama centered on greatness. Then one elbow changed the narrative overnight. Now people were questioning his maturity, his composure, his ability to handle playoff pressure, and whether fair or unfair. Those doubts follow players for a long time in this league. That's what made the situation so dangerous for San Antonio. Because the Timberwolves suddenly had emotional momentum, Anthony Edwards looked energized by the chaos surrounding the series. Minnesota's confidence grew with every debate show, every suspension rumor, every replay clip flooding social media. The Wolves no longer looked intimidated by Wembanyama. For the first time all postseason, they looked fearless. And if the NBA suspended Victor for Game 5, the pressure on San Antonio would become overwhelming instantly. Losing back-to-back playoff games without their superstar could completely flip the series. Suddenly, the Spurs would be staring at elimination after once looking fully in control. That's how brutal playoff basketball can be. One emotional reaction, one moment of frustration, one mistake under pressure, and everything changes. But maybe the biggest lesson from all of this has nothing to do with basketball itself. Greatness always comes with pressure. The bigger the superstar becomes, the harder opponents try to break them emotionally. Legends are not remembered because they avoided adversity. They're remembered because they learned how to survive it. And now Victor Wembanyama faces the biggest emotional test of his young career. Not whether he can score, not whether he can dominate, but whether he can grow from this moment instead of being consumed by it. Because the truth is simple. The NBA still believes Victor Wembanyama is the future of basketball. But after Game 4, the future suddenly feels far more complicated than anyone expected. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this with other NBA fans. And before you go, tell me this honestly in the comments. Did the Timberwolves push Wembanyama too far, or did the young superstar simply lose control? Press 1 if you blame Minnesota's physicality. Press 2 if you think Wembanyama crossed the line himself. Because this debate is far from over, the lesson behind the chaos. No matter what the NBA decides after Game 4, one thing is already undeniable. Victor Wembanyama changed during this series. Because moments like this leave scars on players. Emotional scars. Mental scars. The kind that either destroy young superstars or transform them into something even more dangerous. And honestly, that may become the biggest story moving forward. Not the elbow, not the controversy, not even the suspension debate. The real story is what Victor Wembanyama becomes after surviving all of this. Because every legendary player eventually reaches a moment where basketball stops being just talent versus talent. Eventually it becomes pressure versus maturity, emotion versus discipline, chaos versus control. Michael Jordan faced it. Kobe Bryant faced it. LeBron James faced it. Every all-time great had a moment where the pressure became overwhelming and the entire world questioned whether they were truly ready to carry the weight of superstardom. Now it's Wembanyama's turn. And maybe that was inevitable from the beginning. Because nobody enters the NBA with expectations this massive. Nobody gets compared to legends before turning 23 years old without eventually feeling the emotional pressure that comes with it. The spotlight surrounding Wembanyama has been non-stop since the day he entered the league. Every game televised, every mistake analyzed, every dominant performance turned into another impossible expectation. That pressure can elevate players, but it can also break them. The Timberwolves understood that throughout this series. They attacked him physically, emotionally, mentally. They forced him into uncomfortable basketball every single night until frustration finally exploded into the biggest controversy of his young career. And yet, Moments like this can sometimes create greatness instead of destroying it. Because adversity teaches superstars things dominance never can. It teaches patience, emotional control, leadership, the ability to stay calm while the entire world watches you under pressure. Those lessons matter just as much as points and championships, maybe even more. That's why the next chapter of Victor Wembanyama's career suddenly feels so important. The league already knows he has the talent to become unstoppable. The numbers prove it, the awards prove it, the playoff performances prove it. Now, he must prove something far more difficult. Can he emotionally master the chaos that comes with becoming the face of basketball? Because if he learns that, the rest of the NBA may have an even bigger problem than before. And honestly, that possibility should terrify the league. If you made it all the way to the end, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share this video with every NBA fan you know. And before you leave, comment below with your final opinion on this entire situation. Was Victor Wembanyama unfairly targeted throughout the series? Or did he make a mistake that could cost the Spurs their season? Press 1 if you believe the Timberwolves pushed him too far. Press 2 if you believe Wembanyama must take full responsibility. And stay tuned, because this NBA story is only getting started.